Okay, so today we're going to learn about factor by grouping. Factor by grouping is a type of factoring that uses the greatest common factor to factor polynomials with 4 terms. You can only use the grouping method when you have 4 terms. Sometimes you can factor a polynomial by grouping it into 2 terms and factoring the GCF out of both, so the greatest common factor out of each group. Alright, so the first one we're going to look at is right here. We always want to look to see if there's a GCF first. We take out the entire polynomial, but there's nothing that I can take out of all 4, so I'm just going to get started with the grouping method. The first step is to group the 4 terms into 2 sets of binomials. So you learned binomials mean 2 terms, so you're going to group the first 2 together, and you're going to group the second 2 together. Make sure the sign in front of the third term always gets put in parentheses. From there, I'm only going to look at the first binomial, and I'm going to find the GCF in that binomial. The greatest common factor with these 2 is x squared. So I can take an x squared out of both, which then when I take an x squared out, x cubed divided by x squared leaves just an x, plus 4x squared divided by x squared just leaves a 4. So that first binomial now says x squared, x plus 4. Now I look at the second one. The greatest common factor of 6x and 24 is 6, so I can take a positive 6 out of both, and that plus 6 that I just took out is going to go right there, leaving 6x divided by 6 just leaves an x, and 24 divided by 6 leaves a 4. Now, when you are doing the grouping method, if you did it correctly, or if the GCF taken out of both is correct, you should have the same binomial in both parentheses, which we do, which means it's the greatest common factor of this and the greatest common factor of that. So I can technically put that x plus 4 here, and then my 2 terms that are left over, that x squared and that plus 6, they get put together. And then I just factored this polynomial up top into these 2 binomials, and that's your final answer. Now if we look at the bottom, we have these 2 examples. I am going to start with the one on number 2, and then I'll go back to 1. Number 2, I can check to see if there's any GCF there. There's not, so I'm just going to start. I'm going to put the first 2 in parentheses, and I'm going to make sure that negative goes with the second binomial. The GCF of my first binomial is x squared, so I can take an x squared out of both. So when I take that x squared out, x cubed divided by x squared is just x, because 3 minus 2 is 1. 9x squared divided by x squared just leaves 9. Now if I look at the second one, the GCF here is negative 2. I always follow that sign there. I don't ever want the negative with it. So I'm taking the negative 2 out. Negative 2x divided by negative 2, they simplify and just leave an x. Negative 18 divided by negative 2 is a positive 9. I double check to make sure my 2 insides are the same. They are, so I'm good. That means my greatest common factor is x plus 9. I can pull that out. Now this x squared and this negative 2 left over get put right there. And now that polynomial up top just got factored into that. Now let's go back to number 1, and here's why I skipped over it for a second. You always look to see if there's a GCF at the beginning. Is there a greatest common factor I could pull out of all 4 terms? The answer should be yes, and it technically would be a 2. I can take 2 out of every single one of those terms. That 2 pops out to the front, leaving x cubed plus 4 divided by 2 is 2, x squared plus 3x plus 6. Okay, that was my first step. I'm not going to worry about this 2 until the very, very last step. I can now start my grouping process. I'm going to put the first 2 into parentheses, and I'm going to put the last 2 terms into parentheses. My GCF here is going to be x squared. I'm going to just leave the 2 there, so don't touch it yet. We'll come back to it in a second. X cubed divided by x squared is x. 2x squared divided by x squared leaves a 2. Now if I look here, my GCF is a positive 3. So I put that plus 3 right there, leaving x plus 2. My insides are the same, so I'm going to write that first, and then that x squared and that plus 3 go together. Now, here's the part you might forget, so you got to make sure you're double checking. Remember that 2 up there that we took out at the beginning? That 2 has to go in front. We factored it out. So, now this is my final answer. Alright, let's flip to the back. Let's try one more together, and then the rest will be on an answer key in Classroom. Let's look at number 3. Number 3, there's no GCF I can take out from the beginning, so I'm just going to start my grouping process, put my first 2 together, make sure my plus sign goes with the second set. My GCF here would be 5x squared. So I put the 5x squared out front. 5x cubed divided by 5x squared is just an x. 25x squared divided by 5x squared, 25 divided by 5 is 5. That x squared just simplifies to 1, so it goes away. The GCF of x and 5 is just 1. So I have to divide both of those by 1. And that plus 1 goes on the outside. So even though the GCF is only 1, you need to make sure the plus 1 is there. And then x plus 5 gets rewritten, because x divided by 1 is x, 5 divided by 1 is 5. My insides are the same. That's my GCF, x plus 5, and then 5x squared and 1 get put together. And that is the factored form of my polynomial up top. If you have any other questions, just come see me during enrichment or after school.